How quickly do you think the game Peggle can be beaten? How quickly could it be beaten with only its worst characters? This is a question that the Peggle speedrun community has worked hard to answer. And while the PopCap Classic is loved by many for its simple but satisfying gameplay, there are few who know the game's ins and outs like Peggle speedrunners do. Over the past few years, Peggle speedrunning has grown immensely, especially with the help of YouTuber DukeDunac shining a spotlight on the game's dedicated community, and this video is a testament to that. Peggle is all about hitting pegs in a pachinko and pinball-inspired gameplay loop, where the normal goal is to earn points. In the context of speedrunning, however, the goal becomes beating every level as quick as possible. And to do this, you simply need to clear all the orange pegs from the board. It's simple enough at its core. If you've played Peggle Deluxe, you'll know it has 55 levels, with 10 Peggle Masters spread throughout the game, who have different powers to help you out on each level. As a good rule of thumb, in Peggle, clearing a level of all the oranges generally takes about a minute on average. So taking that into consideration, you'd think that an average decent run would be around 55 minutes, right? Well, it's not so easy. There are a lot of other things to take into account. First, while overall peg placement is the same every time on each level, the placement of where the orange pegs are is different every time, meaning each level will need to be approached a bit differently on every playthrough in order to clear it quickly. Beyond this, some levels are just much harder than others. Even for the world's best players, losses are fairly common, and the biggest part of grinding for a PB at most levels of play is to just get good and lucky enough to avoid those losses. Even beyond that, however, are the Peggle Masters themselves. Each Peggle Master has a different power, and those powers vary greatly. Some are insanely useful, and can help crush levels much quicker than normal. On the other hand, some powers are so useless that they can slow you down compared to having no power at all. And for categories where you have to use those characters, that's obviously not ideal. As players began to speedrun the game in the years following its 2007 release, it became clear that even a sub-hour in the fastest categories would not be quite as simple as it seems at first glance. In fact, the first sub-hour run of Peggle Deluxe wouldn't be completed until more than 10 years after its release. However, on the 5th of November 2023, a massive community milestone was achieved as the game's last major category finally had the hour barrier broken. In this video, we'll take a brief look at how this happened, what it means, and the journey that the Peggle community underwent to achieve this feat. I hope you enjoy. First, let's set the stage a little bit. When it comes to Peggle speedrunning, there's two main types of runs: normal full game runs and completionist type runs. The Grandmaster and Extreme Grandmaster categories fall into the latter set, with runs taking several hours as you try to complete extra objectives beyond just beating the game normally. Those categories are extremely interesting in their own right, but that's a topic for another day. The runs we're worried about today are full game runs, which can further be broken down into a few types. Any percent or adventure mode is the classic run, where you start a new save file and beat the game normally. All the rest are technically variants of New Game Plus, where you do a second playthrough on a save file. Within that group though, you have New Game Plus Standard, where you are free to use any of the 10 Peggle Masters on each level, so you can use the best master every time. And you also have Random Master Only, where you use the built-in Random Master button to use a random master on every level. And then beyond those two, we have what are also called Individual Master Runs, where you beat the entire game using only a single master for every level. So for instance, if it's Splork percent, then you only use the Peggle Master Splork on every single level, etc. And since there are 10 masters in the game, this means that we have 10 of those IM categories. In total, this brings us up to 13 full game categories, some of which are much harder than others. So with all that being said, which of the 13 categories would be the first to fall under the hour barrier? Well, somewhat unsurprisingly, it was New Game Plus. Certain Peggle Master abilities are better on certain levels and layouts, and being able to choose which master you use on every single level makes New Game Plus the easiest category in the game by far. And while Peggle did go a whole decade before its first sub-hour happened, on March 19, 2018, the player Koro got a time of 59.50, breaking the sub-hour barrier wide open. Koro was at the time a world record holder in multiple categories already, and so it was a little bit unsurprising that he was the first to break sub-hour. But what does make it notable is the fact that this was several years before the major growth that the community would eventually experience, and strategies at the time were much more primitive. For that reason, Koro's early records in the game are that much more impressive, and he certainly was a trailblazer for the game's speedrun community. In fact, after Koro's sub-hour, the next category to finally hit sub-hour wouldn't be for another 3.5 years, and this time it would come from a runner who is nowadays known as the most dominant Peggle speedrunner in the world. That runner's name? Pnaha.
Oh my god. Oh, that was really good.
Pnaha, a Finnish speedrunner, began speedrunning the game in 2018. However, as the years passed, he soon became a titan, the titan even, of the Peggle speedrun community. His streak of domination is something that I might want to cover in a future video, all on its own. But one of his longest win streaks is with the Any% world record in Peggle Deluxe, which is the single most run category in the community, and definitely the most prestigious record out of all of them too. In October of 2020, Pnaha took the Any% world record from Koro with the time of 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 39 seconds. However, he didn't just stop there. As other players began running, he proactively brought down his Any% time lower and lower, shaving minutes off with every PB. As 2021 came around and the YouTuber DukeDunac shone a light onto Peggle speedrunning, more competition arose, but Pnaha still dominated on top. While Any% is on paper theoretically harder than many of the other runs that would come later, due to its prestige, Pnaha ran it more than any other category during this time. And for that reason, in late August 2021, Pnaha got this run. A massive jump to sub 59 was an incredible achievement for Any%, and Pnaha has only brought the Any% world record even lower since then. But now that the two biggest categories for the game were out of the way, where would the next sub-hour be? It was during the next year or so that things really heated up in the community. While Pnaha still dominated, in 2022 many more players were beginning to speedrun the game, and the level of competition and skill was drastically increasing. New players such as AnyGeorge appeared from seemingly out of nowhere, with crazy skills that let them immediately put pressure on Pnaha. While in other categories, players fought over smaller records, bringing them down one step at a time. And now that New Game Plus and Any% were out of the way, it seemed like the next to hit sub-hour would have to be one of the individual master categories, with the four most likely options being Splork, whose explosion power is great for clearing large groups of pegs quickly, Tula, whose power clears 20% of the remaining orange pegs, leading to quicker clears in pretty much any situation, Cinderbottom, whose fireball power can sweep through massive swaths at every level, and whose Zen Ball ability tweaks your shot to get the highest value possible, often clearing large groups of oranges in the process. So the community waited, and luckily they wouldn't need to wait another 3 years. On the 4th of July 2022, the sub-hour was broken again, this time with Lord Cinderbottom. His fireball ability lends itself well to many levels in the game, so it came as a surprise to very few that the hour barrier could be crushed with him. But even still, it was done to an insane degree, coming in with a sub 57 time. And the person to do it was none other than Pnaha. Once again, he had struck, and it seemed that maybe he would go through the whole list of IM runs after this. He certainly had the skills to take many other runs below sub-hour. However, Pnaha also didn't necessarily care for too many of those runs.
Usually when I see people play IMs, it's very painful, and I usually like seeing people have fun, instead of being in pain.
Pnaha is known to prefer Cinder over pretty much all the other characters in the game, so it's not necessarily surprised that that would be the only IM that he'd seriously run for quite some time. The recent rise of other runners such as AnyGeorge had also shown that he would need to defend his Any% and New Game Plus records as well. He had his hands full. And so, no new IM categories would have their sub-hour. For about 2 months. In fact, this is where things take a turn, because even without Pnaha, the month of September 2022 would see not just one category, but 3 separate IM runs get their first sub-hour time. Let's dive right in. The first was on September 6th, where the previously mentioned AnyGeorge would strike. George is a self-described Tula simp, and so it surprised no one when he brought Tula to an astounding 56-56, showing that he could also hit well into the 50s, like Pnaha before him. Not to be outdone, however, the remaining 2 strong Peggle IM categories, Splork and Who, would both be brought to sub-hour bliss by the same runner, within a week of each other no less. And this runner's name was Britsha. Britsha had been slowly rising in the ranks in various categories, and towards the end of 22, he was one of only a handful of players to reach sub-hour in Any%. But unlike Pnaha and even George to a lesser extent, Britsha didn't mind grinding IM runs, and the sub-hour barrier for Splork and Who were just too tantalizing to pass up. On September 17th, Britsha achieved a time of 58-52 with Who. And, less than a week later, on the 23rd of September, he followed it up with a time of 59-59 and 0.8 of a second, barely breaching the hour with Splork, but doing it nonetheless.
Wait, no.
The community was stunned by this sudden burst of records and milestones. It was incredible just how much was being done in such a short period of time, and as 2022 wrapped up, it seemed inevitable that more of the remaining categories would fall. However, things wouldn't be so simple. While Peggle speedrunners at the time knew it was technically possible to get sub-hour with pretty much any category, realistically for some, it seemed a little far-fetched. Let's review what was left at the end of 2022. The first are the 3 mid-tier IM categories, as I'm going to classify them. First we have Jimmy, whose multi-ball ability lets you get more value out of some shots, but doesn't necessarily always do too much to help you out. Then we have Renfield, who gives your special shots a second pass through the level, which can be valuable, but normally at the cost of time. And finally we have Warren, whose ability spins a wheel with various possible rewards, including the infamous Magic Hat. All 3 of these masters are useful in certain situations, but they're nowhere near as consistently good as the previous masters. Then we have the 3 awful IM categories. Bjorn, the de facto mascot of Peggle, whose aiming guideline ability is not very useful for speed. Cat Tut, whose pyramid ability can be good for survival, but who also has a tendency to slow down shots for long periods of time. And finally, Claude the Lobster, whose flipper ability is a mixed bag, with a high skill ceiling and high potential, but oftentimes again at the cost of a lot of speed. Let's pause for a moment to talk about why some of these categories are so much more difficult than the ones that came earlier. In the future, I might make a full video diving deeper into the tech behind top-tier Peggle runs, but for now, let's focus on the big picture. Top players normally don't have too much of an issue clearing the majority of the levels in the game fairly consistently, even on the harder masters. Generally, a lot of the time loss comes from just not having the better powers of the better masters. It might add up to only a few seconds per level, but it does add up. The biggest problem, however, is the fact that a few specific levels, mainly in the late game, are absolutely brutal, especially with specific masters. Spread throughout stages 7 through 10 are a few levels with moving pegs, awkward brick patterns, and other obstacles to deal with. These are all difficult levels where there's always a higher chance of something going wrong. And then we have the veritable gauntlet that happens at the very end of the run. 10-5, known more infamously by its level title Zenfrog, and right after that, the 5 master levels of Stage 11. The master levels each present unique challenges, some of which are more suited for certain characters than others. Out of the master levels, however, the most infamous run killer of all is the Helix. The very last level in the game, the Helix is quite an intimidating level. Its layout makes many of the powers in the game fairly meaningless. Countless of record-paced runs over the years have died to this level at the very end of hour-long runs. Of course, this led to runners inventing strategies. One early strategy pioneered by DukeDunac, Pnaha, and various others was to break open a section of the Helix with a couple of well-placed shots, and then, with precise timing, get a ball trapped, clearing the majority of the level in one go as the ball rises up through the Helix. This made the level much more bearable, but it was still relatively unreliable. But in 2022, a major discovery and innovation was made by the runner FaussePasserby. In mid-2022, she discovered that by aiming at a specific spot on a very specific peg, and with very precise timing, the first shot of the whole level can get launched into the bottom of the Helix, instantly setting you up for an easy win on the level. This strategy is extremely precise, but since it's the first shot of the level, you can reset very quickly to get many attempts at it. Since then, it's been studied and improved even more, and was even performed live at SGDQ 2023 by Britsha. It's just as a warning, this might take a few retries, but trust me, it'll be worth it.
Definitely.
And yeah, the incentive is that we're gonna full clear this level, every single peg on the entire level.
Yeah!
Second try!
Second try! Second try!
Look at this thing go! Woo!
All of these innovations mean that, while difficult, the master levels have become more bearable and a little bit more consistent as time has gone on. But one level to this day remains the bane of existence for all Peggle speedrunners, and its name is Zenfrog. It's probably already apparent why this level is so brutal. Most pegs on the board are constantly moving, and not in a way that generally lets you hit groups of them together. Some powers, such as Bjorn's aiming power, are even more useless than normal with these moving pegs. And even the best master powers can still come up short when faced against the 4-armed frog. In the end, Zenfrog requires a mix of skill and luck, and even for the absolute best runners in the world, there's no guarantee of a win on this level. If you haven't played or speedrun Peggle before, this is meant to just give an idea of what Peggle speedrunners of all levels go up against when getting to the tail end of the run. While most runs won't even necessarily make it this far, out of the runs that do, a massive percent of those runs die to Zenfrog and the master levels, even with all the years of innovations that the community has come up with. And so let's get back to our timeline of events here. The months began to pass on, with various runners trying their hand at these weaker IM categories. Ironically enough, however, the next category to hit sub-hour wouldn't be any of these 6 remaining IMs. It would actually be Random Master Only. Random Master Only, as the name implies, is, well, very random. And while you may think, well, why not just reset every level till you roll a good character? This is banned by the rules of the category, because the whole idea is to force players to adapt to a truly random lineup of powers throughout the game. This was a truly daunting challenge to take on sub-hour for. But as the months progressed, it became clear that several players had the core skills necessary to do it. As the times began to drop, Pnaha even grazed the sub-hour mark, barely missing it by 22 seconds. But the barrier wouldn't end up being broken by Pnaha for RMO. On May 14th of 2023, AnyGeorge got a time of 59 minutes flat, employing advanced strategies that let him clutch out the win in the end. At this point, any %, New Game Plus, RMO, and 4 of the 10 IM categories had been beaten under an hour, leaving only the 6 previously mentioned master categories left to beat. And the next to fall wouldn't take too much longer. The next to fall would be Warren the Rabbit, achieved by Britsha in June of 2023, with a time of 59:39, once again showing that Britsha should not be underestimated.
Let's go!
And the next one came a couple of weeks after that, this time for Jimmy Lightning, with a time of 59:12, achieved by Brassbeat. Brassbeat has contributed to many speedrunning communities, but in the Peggle speedrunning community, he's held many records and has also delved deeper into the game's mechanics than most other players could imagine.
Oh my god!
Also, as a side note, this run was done during one of a series of break the record type events that I actually host, so it's worth pointing out that Brassbeat did this while competing live against a dozen other elite speedrunners of the game, with prize money on the line. The next to fall after this would be Renfield, done in September by Pnaha, with a time of 57:57. Around this time, Pnaha had begun running some of the IM categories a little bit more frequently, going back on his previous word a bit. And this brings us to late 2023, where only 3 categories remain: Bjorn, Cat Tut, and Claude. The first of these to fall would be Bjorn, happening once again during a Break the Record live event. The runner Polypies took the prize this time, where, on the 14th of October, he achieved a time of 59 minutes flat. Funnily enough, this time was beaten within a couple hours by Pnaha during the same event even, but Polypies did beat him to the sub-hour. And here's where most people, myself included, thought that maybe things would cool down for a bit. After all, even among the 3 weakest categories of Bjorn, Cat Tut, and Claude, Bjorn is not nearly as bad or slow as the other 2. For a long time, Pegglers have known that Cat and Claude would almost certainly be the last categories to hit sub-hour. Their abilities are just so slow that to have a chance, you really need to play pretty much perfectly, or so quick that you risk losing, in a situation where the master powers are not going to help you much or could even directly hurt your run. And things seem like maybe they would slow down for a bit, until out of nowhere, AnyGeorge surprised the entire community when he decided to destroy the run for a character who had long been memed on and despised by both the Peggle and DukeDunac communities.
It's time! Peggle ends today! You've beaten 9 of the 10 champions! What the f***ing lobster has eluded us! That day is today! And that day is now! Now is the time! Yesterday is too late! Tomorrow's too long! Right now!
That's right, Claude the Lobster was finally boiled when, on the 3rd of November 2023, AnyGeorge uploaded this run. $59.03 on Claude the Lobster. George loves pinball, and he showed his pinball chops with this victory. In retrospect, it shouldn't have been shocking. George had held the world record for a while, and had slowly been improving it over the course of several months, but it was still a day that many thought would never have come this soon. And with Claude the Lobster finally boiled, there was only one single category left. One category more, and then Peggle players could truly say that every way to beat the game had been crushed. Cat Tut was all that remained, and at this point, players knew it was doable. By this time, other previously mentioned categories had been brought even lower than an hour. New Game Plus, for instance, now had several times below 55 minutes, and even a couple below 45. And thus a mad dash began. Within hours of George announcing his Claude accomplishment, top runners converged on Cat Tut, and the 2 main ones pushing for the record were 2 who we've seen before, Britsha and Brassbeat. Both of these runners began multiple streams and sessions of attempts. Some runs died early, some runs died later, and the infamous Zenfrog level near the end of the game killed many of the attempts that were on sub-hour pace.
Zenfrock will always be Zenfrock. Unfortunate.
Now, what are you supposed to do in this point, huh? I've just lost twice to Zenfrog. Like, for nothing. Like, I've played good. I lost twice to Zenfrog. What am I supposed to do now? I had it. I had sub-hour. I was so happy with this one. I was so proud of it. I can get world record, but I can't get sub-hour now. Even though that was like the perfect run to get sub-hour. Brilliant.
For a couple of streams, Britsha even put his stream category on Twitch as hell, as the mental effect of playing these awful runs can definitely get to the head of even the strongest speedrunners of the game. But to put it in the words of the Trackmania documentarian Wirtual, whenever you're chasing a goal, setbacks and mistakes will happen, but you only really fail when you decide to give up. If you haven't given up, you haven't yet failed. And so, while the rest of the community waited with bated breath, Britsha and Brassbeat both pushed on, until, on the 5th of November 2023, Britsha woke up, started a run of cat percent in Peggle Deluxe, and achieved this run.
I did it, 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 I did it!
The grind had paid off, and Britsha could rest easy, knowing that he had helped the community reach one of its biggest milestones. Many of the 13 categories in this video have been demolished even more since their original sub-hour runs happened. And there are many other runners who have also contributed to the efforts of bringing down all these numerous categories. Britsha's achievement just marks the final of these 13 different hour barriers, each of which really could be its own story. And it's also certain that Peggle speedrunners won't stop there, even for terrible categories like Cat Tut. After all, this is not the end, but rather the start of a new chapter of Peggle's rich speedrunning history. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. This is my first time trying a video like this, and obviously I took a lot of inspiration from SummoningSalt and Wirtual and other creators who I really do admire. So if you did like it, feel free to leave a like, and other than that, I hope that I will have the chance to tell more Peggle speedrunning stories like this in the future. Have a good day.